It's time for the Covrprice Top 10. We're going back 3 years. All right, guys, we're going back 3 years on this Covrprice sales data. Before we get into it, you know what to do: to subscribe, the thumbs up, all that kind of stuff. Don't forget the discount codes down below. You have a Covrprice discount code. You have a Mutant Beaver Comics discount code. You have a Whatnot discount code. And now, for all you guys and girls who ship a lot of comic books, Gemini Comic Supply is where you want to get your supplies. VERYGARY 10 gets you 10% off your Gemini mailers. Use the code. I do. I don't even know if I'm allowed to, but I do. So there you go. 10% off your shipping supplies from GeminiComicSupply.com. All right, with that, let's get into our list. This one comes again from Covrprice. This is their movers and shakers list from 3 years ago. We're going to see how those books did then and how they are today. Let's jump right into it. Let's get to number 10. This is Vengeance number 1. 3 years ago, Marvel Studios' Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was the perfect movie to fuel comic speculation, including multiple Spider-Men and the universe-hopping America Chavez. On the casting of Zotil Gomez, I'm definitely saying that wrong, Chavez's first appearance of Vengeance number 1 jumped to a record high. The book has fallen back to earth 3 years later, making it a bust. In October of 2020, raw copies of Vengeance number 1 were selling for around $150, and graded 9.8s were selling for $770. 3 years later, that number has fallen by more than half. Collectors looking to buy Vengeance number 1 today are looking at $78 for near mint raw copies, $351 for 9.8. That said, it's important to remember that this book was a dollar bin staple for years. In 2018, when speculation began, a near mint raw cost about $15 and CGC 9.8s were $200. If you bought it early enough, you're still ahead. If you factor in the news of only the best MCU characters surviving after Secret Wars, it may be an excellent time to buy the dip with America Chavez. That's number 10. Let's get to number 8. This is Green Lantern number 9. Green Lantern number 20. 3 years ago, rumors were swirling around about which Green Lanterns would be included in the upcoming HBO Max series. Good money was on Jessica Cruz being heavily featured, which drove up the price of her cameo in Green Lantern number 20. 3 years later, DC has gone through a significant shakeup, and this hot book has frozen over, making it a bust. In the fall of 2020, near mint raw copies of Green Lantern 20 were fetching $83, with 9.8 selling for about $126. Currently, that book is selling for around $5 near mint raw copies and just over $80 for CGC 9.8s. While that's still a decent price for the 9.8 raw copy, or 9.8 raw copies have hit rock bottom. This book is also a bit of an odd duck, as CGC Notables notates this as the first appearance of Jessica Cruz in a one-panel cameo, face not revealed, which is referred to as the infamous first arm appearance. Even though a version of Lanterns is still in development at DC, it will be less space opera and more true detective. I actually like the shift in the Green Lantern series. We'll see what James Gunn does with it. I've always liked this book. Careful with this one. It's a square-bound book. Green Lantern number 20. I believe it's a wraparound cover, and there's like multiple copies. Like there's multiple copies of this, multiple versions, variants, and whatnot. Let's get to number 8. This is The Boys Herogasm number 1. The Boys may be one of the best superhero shows in history, and thus the comics have been a massive spike since the series debuted on Amazon Prime 3 years ago. The Boys Herogasm number 1 was super hot based on the casting of Jensen Ackles of Supernatural fame to play Soldier Boy. The hype has died 3 years later, and this book looks like a bust. In October of 2020, news had just hit that Ackles would be playing Soldier Boy, making this book jump to $64 for a near mint raw copy. At the time, there were no recorded 9.8 graded sales of this book, but it did hit a high of $435 of March 2021, when it was announced that the over-the-top episode based on this issue would be featured in season 3. Today, you can purchase a raw copy of The Boys Herogasm #1 for around $20. Graded 9.8 copies are currently sitting around $150. I also agree that The Boys is probably the best comic book TV show adaptation. Or I shouldn't say adaptation, but based on the comic book, because there's a lot of differences. It's unbelievable if you haven't watched it. Let's get to number 7. This is We Live #1, the Dustin Nguyen 1 in 15 variant. Set in 2084, We Live was created by Inaki Miranda, Catwoman, Batman Beyond, and Roy Miranda, and follows one of the last humans on Earth. The 1 in 15 variant sold nearly 60 copies upon its debut this week 3 years ago, propelling it to the top 10 list. 3 years later, a product of the next big indie book spec, the Win variant has largely cooled off, but remains a draw. This week in 2020, this book was selling for $46 out of the gate. Today, you can expect to spend about $40 for a near mint raw copy. Since it was the new release at the time, no sales of graded 9.8 copies were recorded. Today, 9.8 graded copies are selling for $82. This book is a bit of a roller coaster as it hit a high of $300 in a 9.8 of October of 2022. So it's a year ago, when the artist on this series teased a soon-to-be Netflix announcement via their social media. That news never came, and ultimately its momentum was torpedoed when Aftershock went bankrupt and the WGA began its strike. Keep in mind that despite Aftershock's bankruptcy, it would not stop any content development. Fans love this story, hence why it's holding its value raw. It could bounce back in the future. Sometimes these publishers can sell off their IP. So like if they sell this off, and correct me if I'm wrong though, but they could sell this off to an IDW, to an Image, to a Boom, which I think if something like that happens and Aftershock does fizzle away, but the story can, and I'm not sure because it's possible that the Wins own the rights. I don't know how this exactly works, but they could take it and pitch it to other publishers. So even if Aftershock goes away and everything with it dies, I could see the We Live series moving on to a different publisher. If I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments, but I don't think so. Let's get to number 6. This is the Walking Dead Deluxe #1 gold foil. It's a mouthful. Insert Dr. Manhattan meme. It's 2020. Collectors are going ham over these foils. Flash forward to 2023, and collectors are still going ham over foils. 3 years ago, the Walking Dead Deluxe #1 gold foil, only the logo was foil, so I would almost call that a spot foil, was released as a 1 per store, making it the shiny new toy of the week and propelling it to the top 10. It's still shiny 3 years later, but no one cares in today's market, making it a bust. In October of 2020, the book hit a high sale of $179.99 for a raw copy before settling down to $60. As it was brand new, there were no graded 9.8 sales. Today, this book can easily be found for about $30 raw and $88 in a 9.8. Overall, it's a nice reminder that 1 per stores are not rare, despite the illusion of 1 per title. So I don't know, 1 per store just means that there's 1 for every store that ordered a copy. So like, how many comic shops are there in the country? 5,000? I don't know. I just threw that number out there. Anyway, that's the print run. All right. So is it rare? Kind of, sort of, because the numbers are limited. But at the same time, you see a lot of store exclusive variants come out and they say only 500 printed. And even those drop to like 10, 20 bucks. So 1 per store, I think it's a really good sales pitch. Let's get to number 5. This is Static #1. The internet was a buzz 3 years ago with Static Shock headlines such as Michael B. Jordan signed on to produce the DC movies Static Shock. As a result, Static #1 caught fire after decades of neglect. The book has dipped 3 years later, but remains at a higher price point than it did for most of the last 30 years. While it may look like a bust in a 3-year value comparison over its 30-year history, this counts as a boost. Static Shock has yet to see the limelight. This week in 2020, near mint raw copies of this book were selling for $80, with graded 9.8 copies selling for $250. Today, that number's been cut in half, with a high grade raw copy selling for about $40, 9.8 selling for $100. Since this book has cooled off, it may be the time to jump in before Gunn gets his hands on this property. And I'm telling you guys, this has James Gunn written all over it. I feel like this is a James Gunn character. and he's just going to do a really good job with it. Just my opinion. I don't know how you feel about the subject, but I do. And if the price, I don't know how much further down the prices can go on something like this. Keep an eye on it. And I say this all the time. Don't take my word for it. Don't do that. Do your own research. Do your due diligence. Do your homework. Take what I say with a tiny grain of salt and collect more information. And then you have a lot more pieces of salt, and then you can make an educated decision if you want to purchase something or not. Again, this is just a little bit of information. There's a ton out there. Go get it. Let's get to number 4. Nope. Let's get, 4. Justice League number 50. That makes sense because we're talking Jessica Cruz here. Justice League number 50 is the first appearance of Jessica Cruz as a Green Lantern and was extremely hot 3 years ago due to the speculation she would be included in the Green Lantern series for HBO. As mentioned above, most of that spec has been nuked 3 years later. This book sold for $40 near mint back in 2020 and now can be found for around $10. The winner here is the guy who sold a 9.8 graded copy for $235 in 2020. That same book now sells for $50 in 9.8. The book is a complete bust for now. However, early rumors upon March 2023's news of James Gunn's DCU rebuilding, Jessica Cruz was highlighted as a must-have for the featured Green Lantern for our Green Lantern for now. We'll wait and see. I actually think that all these Jessica Cruz books are grossly undervalued. They were also extremely overvalued. I think you got to find a happy point in the middle because they're still good keys. Jessica Cruz is a great character. I actually like her. I've always been upset every time they introduce more and more Green Lanterns, but I actually like her. I liked her origin story. If you guys have not read the New 52 Justice League run, written by Jeff Johns, I suggest you read it. My favorite artist and writer worked on this arc, the Darkseid War. It's Jason Fabok did the art. Jeff Johns did the story. Unbelievably amazing read. It's a great Justice League story. Actually, the entire Justice League run through the New 52 was great. It was all written by Jeff Johns. Whew, that's a mouthful. Let's get to number 3. This is Static number 1, the Collector's Edition. Fun fact, many copies of Static number 1 you used to find in the wild are the polybagged Collector's Edition. And while they may not be super rare, this variant tends to command a slightly higher price tag. Based on the previously noted Michael B. Jordan news, this book saw highs 3 years ago, but has since cooled down in 2023. Like the A cover, Static number 1 Collector's Edition is a bust 3 years later, but it also still a boost for me due to it being way undervalued for decades, upled with the character's high cinematic potential. In October of 2020, high-grade copies of this book were selling for around $100. 9.8 graded copies were moving at an astounding $500. Today, those numbers have dropped significantly. You can buy a near mint raw copy of this book for $28 if you're looking for a graded copy. Be prepared to spend around $150. This seems like a great price to jump into a copy. Again, James Gunn, I feel like he's got this character. He's got him. I think he's going to use him. I think he's going to be successful. I'm excited. And I'm almost thinking, and I could be wrong. All right? I could be wrong. But if James Gunn can do to the DCU what I think he can, I think there can be a resurgence in superhero movies, comic book movies, because he is so... I just think he's a great director. I really do. I think he's a great director, and he can take no-name characters and turn it into major cinematic blockbusters, hence the Guardians of the Galaxy. The Guardians weren't household names, all right? Now they are. That's crazy. Let's get to number 2. This is Mad Max Fury Road Furiosa number 1. Released around the same time as the film Mad Max Fury Road, Furiosa number 1 delved into the backstory of the apocalyptic heroine in 2015. Now, in 2020, this book caught fire after news that Anya Taylor, Chris Hemsworth, and Yahya Abdul-Mateen would star in Furiosa. 3 years and one large strike later, that movie, like many others, have been put into question, leaving the book in spec limbo. This book looks like a draw. Now, in October of 2020, near mint raw copies of this book were selling for around $14. Today, that same book costs around $6. 3 years ago, 9.8 graded copies were moving at nearly $90. And in 2023, there's been no recent sales. There's potential here if you still believed in the speculation market, especially since the first movie did so well. Now, with that, guys, before we get to number one, I want to remind everybody all those discount codes down below, especially the Covrprice one. Check it out. It's an unbelievably useful tool if you are a collector. There's a discount code down below. It might even be a free trial. I'm not sure what I have down there, but check the description of this video and get yourself on there. It's a great way to monitor your collection. Now, with that, let's get to number one. This is Ecto Kid number one. 3 years ago, this dollar bin hit the top 10 due to news that Clive Barker was developing the property into a TV series. 3 years later, there's been no news on this project, and the market doesn't seem to care, leaving it as a bust in 2023. This book hit a high of $35 in 2020 and sold for an astounding $400, graded 9.8. Today, you can nab copies for $3 and under. If you're looking for a 9.8 copy of this book, that will cost you $44. 2020 wasn't the first time Barker had talked about developing Ecto Kid into a TV series. In 2001, he sold the property to Nickelodeon to be developed as a TV show. If you believe Clive Barker, the current market values are as low as they could possibly get. Guys, make sure you check out covrprice.com. Check out their new movers and shakers list and come back next time because we're going back 4 years. We're going to 2019, pre-COVID. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep it comics.